Hello everybody. So this video is going to be a very brief one about the differences between basic or primary emotions and secondary emotions. So in general, basic emotions are a limited set of emotions that have a certain characteristics that secondary emotions don't have. So these basic characteristics that basic or primary emotions have include they're universal, meaning you can find them everywhere on the planet. They have distinct neurological substrates. What does that mean? It means that there's a specific neural circuit, there's a specific area and series of connections in the brain that become active when you experience a particular basic emotion. And they originate earlier in development. So basic emotions show up in infants, more so show up in infants, whereas secondary emotions don't. All right. So these three features, universal, show up early in development, and they have a distinct neurological substrate. These are kind of characteristics of a small number of basic emotions. Now there's only 6 widely agreed on basic emotions. Those are anger, fear, surprise, disgust, sadness, and happiness. All right. Again, anger, fear, surprise, disgust, sadness, and happiness. All right. And those are the 6 basic emotions. And we see those 6 basic emotions very early in ontology, ontological development, basically very early in life. So infants demonstrate many of some of these emotions as early as 6 months after birth. All right, so it shows up early. Secondary emotions, on the other hand, which are basically every emotion other than those 6, they show up much later in development, and they're not necessarily universal. They are far more susceptible to cultural variation. In fact, secondary emotions are thought to be socially constructed. So, you might find one of these secondary emotions in one culture, but you might not necessarily find them in another. So, anger, sadness, you're going to find them everywhere. Other emotions like pride, confidence, you may not find them everywhere. All right? And so that's the basic distinction between basic or primary emotions and secondary emotions. Now, there's some debate right now in the emotion literature about whether or not these basic emotions even exist. But I tend to, from what I've read, there seems to be pretty good evidence that these basic emotions do exist. For example, one thing that should be clarified about emotions is that they tend to be contextual. You don't very often have emotions in a vacuum. Now, what that means is you typically don't sit in a blank room, think about nothing, and suddenly you're angry. You don't sit in a blank room, in an empty room thinking about nothing, and suddenly you're ecstatic. Typically, that doesn't happen. Typically, something happens in your context, and that makes you happy. Something happens in your context, and that makes you angry. So emotions tend to be contextual. They tend to be triggered by stimuli. So if we were to present a scenario to a person and ask how they might feel, we would expect, at least with the basic emotions, that there would be consistency across country. If we showed people the basic emotions, we would find and ask them, what do you think just happened to that person? We'd probably find consistency across countries, and indeed we do. So when Paul Ekman, one of the originators of this idea of basic emotions, went to certain tribes that had never encountered Western civilization and showed them pictures of Caucasians wearing those 6 basic emotion states and asked them what they thought just happened to them, they gave stories very similar to what very similar to the stories American students gave. So, for example, when he took a picture of a person with a sad expression and showed it to people in these non-westernized tribes and asked them what happened to them, one of the common reactions was, well, they just lost a child. Then when they took that exact same picture to American audiences and said, what just happened to them, they said, well, that person just lost their dog. So loss was involved in both stories. What was lost changed, and that makes sense. people are probably less likely to lose their child in America than they are in non-Westernized civilizations. More dangers there, or at least I would expect there to be. So what was lost changes, but the fact that loss triggers that emotional reaction didn't. So it's universal. All right, and that, my friends, is all that I wanted to discuss. I am having such trouble talking. All I wanted to discuss about the distinctions between basic or primary emotions and secondary emotions. If you have any questions, let me know. Other than that, take it easy.